Who doesn't have a microphone? Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes, thank you for coming. I'm Christina Reese. I'm an editor at Glasstire. I've worn a lot of hats. I've been a curator. I'm not sure I deserved that title when I had it. That was in Fort Worth, and I also owned an art gallery that dealt entirely in contemporary and what we call primary market. We'll get into that in a minute. So I'd like to introduce the panel. So in the blue chair is Michelle White. She is the curator at the Menil here in Houston, one of my very favorite museums on the planet, absolutely. She has worked at other museums as well, so she's definitely kind of our museum person here today. She's the contemporary here, or the Museum of Fine Arts here in Houston, right? Is that correct? As well as the contemporary in San Diego and the Fog at Harvard. So very happy to have her here. In the middle is Jessica Pfeiffer. She is let me get this right, your title. Associate Vice President of Christie's Southwest, is that correct? And she's been with Christie's for about 8 years now. So, and she's going to talk about sort of the whole auction segment of this discussion. So, and then right next to me we have Sandy Parkerson. He was with Sotheby's for 10 years, but in 1980 he came back to Houston. He's a Houstonian. And started a gallery that deals, and it's one of the only galleries, if not the only gallery in Houston that deals exclusively in secondary market art. And everything from Picasso to Remington to very current sort of work by somebody like Helen Altman, who some of you might have heard of. So what we want this to be is we want it to be servicey. I think most of us know that very established collectors who are multi-billionaires who own collections worth millions of dollars, they already know the answer to this question, how to get rid of the artwork that they don't want anymore. They know they can go to Jessica, they know that maybe the Menil wants something that they have, but or that they could sell it through Sandy, but some of us don't know. And when I was running a gallery called Road Agent in Dallas, I had collectors sometimes who were still young and they were very enthusiastic and they bought things with great passion, but a few years on, their taste had changed and they didn't know what to do with what they had. And so maybe we can answer some of these questions today. So I was going to start with Sandy. I'd like for you to define the difference between the primary and the secondary market. I think that it's turned on. Try it.
Now it is.
Oh, all right.
Okay. The difference between the primary and the secondary market is the primary market is operated by the majority of dealers who are introducing an artist to the world or representing somebody who's well established and to the younger artists, helping them make a career and a market and working constantly to promote their careers. The secondary market is the resale of artwork, which is most successful for artists who have been well established in the marketplace as to price and reputation by galleries in the primary market.
Mm-hmm. And there are galleries that they have enough liquidity to where they're doing both. And actually, the resale market is sometimes the bulk of their money. That's where most of their cash is coming from.
Yeah, probably.
Big sales
yes,
in the secondary market, even though they're showing new young artists who don't have a secondary market yet.
Right.
So the sales that they're doing in the back room of a Picasso will be the bulk of their money for that month or that year even. Yeah. Is that right?
Makes it sound easy, but
I know.
It isn't. But their real capital is spent on promoting the careers of the young artist and supporting them not only financially but psychologically. That's a high price.
Right. And so Jessica, a kind of a mid-level collector or a young collector who has something on their hands and they don't know if it's something that they could auction. How would you talk to them? Or do they call you and say, I've got something and can you come look at this and tell me what's going on with it?
That's usually how every single phone call I get begins. I've got something. And so just the most direct, straightforward answer immediately is what's an artist's auction record? They have to have an auction record in order for us to be able to value them and provide an auction estimate. So what that means is if and when an artist has made it to the secondary market, we then take all the comparables we can. So say it's a Picasso gouache, 1943, 20 by 15. Take all the historical examples of how something comparable to that has sold at auction and come up with a mean to provide an auction estimate. So basically, that's the rubric. It's that sort of straightforward. So if there is no such auction record to speak of, we're not in a position to value.
Do collectors, do they ask you to begin to establish this secondary market?
All the time, and that's a tricky process when we're talking about a living artist who's still actively making work. There are a lot of variables we have to take into consideration. If say, Christie's is going to be the one to take on, for the first time ever, presenting an artist for the first time at auction. Mm-hmm. So the considerations we want to be thoughtful of are the artist himself.
Yeah.
Recognizing that this is the first time he's going to be entering an international market. What are the implications of that?
Because if it doesn't sell...
Precisely. Also, we want to take into consideration the dealer representing them and our relationship with that dealer. The collectors who are our regular clients who may also be collecting in depth with that artist. There are political ramifications almost for taking that on when we're not sure how the artist is going to fare.
Right.
Basically what I'm saying is when we're talking about a contemporary artist who's still making work right now, we would rather err on the side of being conservative and not run the risk of affecting their career. Mm-hmm. We have to defer to the dealers to do that. And then, so the primary market really is responsible for getting them to a place where they're being collected in depth.
Have you had young artists call you, make angry phone calls to you saying, I had no idea this collector was going to put my work at auction?
I didn't mean for this conversation to turn so dark.
I didn't either, actually, but I do want to know the answer to this.
It's just all bad news. But no, there are she wants the dark. There are cases like that, and where or a dealer, you get a call from a dealer who says,
can they pull it?
Well, here's what happens. I'll give you the worst case scenario. Let's say I'm dealing with a client who's got a mixed bag of material. They've got some like postmodern stuff that I can price with my eyes closed. Mm-hmm. And then they've got some other stuff they want to sell that's a little bit trickier, that doesn't really have much of an auction record. And if for whatever reason Christie's or Sotheby's or whomever says, okay, let's give all of them a go. Let's give those newer artists a go because we want to win the other business. Yeah, sometimes you do get those calls where the dealer says, well, they're not ready, or the artist says, I thought that there was a relationship here with that collector. I didn't.
Sure.
This is not something I'm supposed to be talking about.
Okay,
this isn't going to my boss. Is that you're sending this? But my point is, these things do happen, and it's something that I think those of us who are a part of those conversations with the seller and determining whether or not I will be more or less the buyer, we're very sensitive to taking those risks.
Sure.
So we would rather not be in that position to potentially upset
Sure.
the very people that we really want to keep happy.
Well, on that note, the idea that a collector wants to give a bulk, a group of things away. So Michelle, if a collector approaches the Manila and says, I have this wonderful thing and it's something you want that the Manila would really love to have, but there are strings attached. They say, but you also have to take this other stuff. Does that happen, and how do you answer that? And
this is just turning into giving away all the dirty stuff that we're not supposed to be talking about.
Yes, it has
do
to.
you
That's
want?
how
I mean, what else
Glasstire
do you wanna
rolls.
But, it has to do with, as a curatorial team in any museum, you established your priorities in terms of how you're collecting. And we have that at the Manil, and the curatorial team, we know what we want. And if we want something that comes with strings attached, it's up to us to decide if we want to
How
take it
common
on
is
or
that?
not. It's actually not that common.
It's not that common. And so would you be willing to take something that you know you're going to put in storage and probably never show in order to get that Picasso that you do want to show?
Yes.
Yes. There it is,
Easy.
folks.
And for that situation is, and I think this has worked out very frequently, is the curators will accept something that they will hold in perpetuity, but reserve the right to sell the lesser things within the period of whatever the museum guidelines suggest, which I think is like 3 years. And I know that happens regularly at bigger museums with much broader sort of material than you all.
Right. I mean, I think museums with more encyclopedic collections, which the Manila is not, their acquisition strategies tend to be about filling holes and creating a sort of encyclopedic purview of the areas they cover. So sometimes it's easier for more encyclopedic museums to deaccession according to those guidelines that they have established. For us, it's a little bit more difficult because we don't have those, and it becomes more about how the collection is forming and the artist and the artwork we choose to add to the Manil collection. So I'd like to think we try not to put ourselves in a position of ever taking a work of art that we would think we would deaccession.
Well, and and I think people are much more aware of the idea of deaccessioning work now that the conversation about Detroit and its collection has been in the news for a while. It's people who might not have really considered what museums do with work that they don't want anymore, which is obviously not the case with Detroit. But there's this kind of taboo around it, it seems like, and now people can be very kind of judgmental about museums that decide that they need to maybe move on. What are the protocols around the Manil saying, we don't need this anymore? What happens? How do you get rid of it? What do you do with the money?
Well, our deaccessioning policies are the same as any other museum. We follow the AAMD guidelines on how to deaccession. So there's only sort of certain criteria that we'll use when we determine if we want to take a work of art to auction. And I'll give one example that recently happened about 2 years ago. In the AAMD guidelines for deaccessioning of a museum, one criteria is if you have duplicates of a work of art. And in the case of the Manil collection, the de Manils, were avid collectors of Max Ernst's bronzes, and often would commission the artist to do multiple bronzes. So we were in a unique position of having 2 casts of the same sculpture. So we took one to auction, and then we used the funds that we raised through the sale to acquire an early work by Max Ernst, which is currently hanging in the gallery. So that really represents kind of the best of deaccessioning, where you use the funds to augment your collection with something, sometimes by the same artist, to make your collection better.
Do you always go to an auction house to do that, or do you sometimes approach a dealer who's
Well, in my time at the Manil, we've only gone through auctions and public auctions, so we're not hiding anything, and it's very public when we're deaccessioning a work of art.
right? Sandy, you must get phone calls from people quite often. They need an appraisal. Even museums, I don't know if museums ever call you and say, we have, like a small regional museum may have something quite interesting, but they need to raise money or what have you. What does an appraisal process look like?
Well, there are several reasons for people wanting appraisals. One is for insurance.
Right.
No intention of disposing of anything. Then for donation.
Donation.
To a museum, essentially.
Yep.
And then for to know what the kind of fair market value of something is. And I'm losing, and estate tax, and those are the most rigorous ones because they are reviewed by the IRS. So there are kind of like 4 aspects to doing it. But what we're dealing with is the people who call up who want to dispose of something, and they want me to do an appraisal of it. I first, in the conversation, determine what it is that they want to do, and because I do charge a fee for doing a formal appraisal, but for preliminary advice, there's no charge whatsoever. Sometimes it's worth the price of nothing. Right. But if I ask them who the artist is. Very often I'm able to take care of it because the artist is a Rembrandt and it isn't, or it is something by an artist that I have never heard of.
Do you have these Antiques Roadshow moments where somebody brings you something you're like, oh my gosh, and they had no idea what they had was so amazing?
Once every 10 years.
Once every 10 years. The golden moment.
Yeah, that doesn't
Is
happen
it mostly
very often.
the children, the offspring of collectors who are saying, we've got some things that our parents collected that we're not going to put in our house, so...
Well, that's the most frequent, and then there's also somebody who has changed their direction of collecting, and for instance, they might have bought a lot of things in the 50s from the Dubose Gallery, for instance, and I don't want to mention any artist names, and I have to determine whether I have an audience for that. And I'd say that 4 times out of 10, I do have an audience, and also fortunately, there's recently been the development of a resale market, secondary market for those artists, which didn't exist 10 years ago. And so sometimes you just have to come down to saying, to thinking, what you bought is like buying a sofa. You bought it for the pleasure of it, but it is not guaranteed to maintain or grow in value. And so really, the only and if I don't have a market or an audience for something, I will refer them to somebody else who does. But it can come down to, I'm sorry, but your only way to dispose of this is on eBay. The most damning thing you can tell somebody.
Do people do that? Do people put their artwork on eBay?
I'm so glad you brought that up because...
They even put genuine stuff on eBay occasionally.
I've never looked for art on eBay.
And our competitor, Sotheby's, has just partnered with eBay. So now you have even more of a forum to address the things that Sandy can't sell.
Wow. Okay, so if a person, when I had road agents, occasionally I would have a collector come in, and often I was selling work by very young artists, MFAs, newly graduated, making exciting work. The market, I mean, if you look at this, there's strata, and most of what I was selling, it just didn't have, there was no resale market for that work. That didn't keep a collector from being interested in the idea of the larger art market or thinking that it was an incredibly sort of glamorous way to get rich quick or something like that. I had very few collectors like that. Most of my collectors were really great. But occasionally a collector would say, well, I want to buy this, but I want to know what it's going to be worth in 5 years or whatever. And I'd say, well, if you don't love it, please don't buy it, because that should be the only reason that you're buying it right now. But to me, do any of you want to talk about
Well, I wanted to tell you that the greatest example of that is not so long ago I was looking at an issue of Life magazine from 1953 where they asked various important dealers like Leo Castelli, several people on 57th Street, who they thought had a big future. 8 out of 10 of those people you've never heard of since. So
absolutely.
So there's
if you
it's a
flip through
percentage
an art
job.
forum from 10 years ago.
But actually, there's something interesting that happens with that. So what we see, oftentimes, this is where the art market is interesting in its ability to round out the canon and how we look back on art making of a given period. For example, I'm working with a client right now who has a beautiful mid-century surrealist painting by one of the only female surrealists. And I'm fighting to kind of push this into a really significant Impressionist and Modern evening sale of ours and put her in the company of the classic examples that we always think of, Magritte et al. Point being, people are finally looking at her work to some degree because you can't afford anyone else of that time. So you're seeing this a lot with modern material, rounding out the canon. Let's start looking at women artists who are making work during this time. Let's start looking at African American artists who are making work during, when people get priced out of this other material, they've just been buying the sexy, splashy blue chip stuff. Well, who else is making work during that time? What else? If I'm genuinely interested in that era of work making, there are lots of people yet to have been discovered, and so.
You're talking, I mean, what you're really saying is that Christie has the power and does exercise the power to create a market.
And to think, but we can only do it, but we'd like to only do that, sort of retroactively. But yeah, I think that's an opportunity to say there were more dialogues happening amongst artists of this era that have not been really addressed, that not even really art historically. So sometimes that's when the market is actually kind of great, when it can be sort of launch someone into recognition that otherwise, for whatever reason, wasn't a white dude,
And there must be collectors out there who have work that they think should be
well, that's
more
when it's
valuable.
ridiculous.
And they would also call the Manil and say, can you, because once something is, you realize that the museum is the most ideal end spot for any artwork to end up in. Do you have collectors call and say, I mean, they may not even be explicit about it, but they're basically saying, please put this work in your museum because it will increase its value.
Right, of course. And I think the classic example of that is exhibition making and the decisions we make as curators, what artists to highlight, say, in an exhibition, and how that in turn affects the value of their work and affects the market, especially if an artist isn't as well known or hasn't had a market history. We're in a unique position to also shape the market in that way. And sometimes even to our disadvantage. If it's an artist, for example, that we would love to bring into the collection, we can conversely push the prices too high and then get bought out of the market for certain pieces.
And that's been really much more common in the last, say, 20 years, it seems like. Museums are increasingly not able to buy the work that they show.
I think so. And I mean, it's incredible in certain exhibitions how you can watch ownership change hands through the course of the 4-month run of an exhibition, where things are, paintings, drawings are being bought and sold throughout the run, and because it's on display in the museum.
Right.
Well, and it's amazing how savvy collectors have become in that way. Where they're calling me and saying, I heard that X is going to be in a show at the Byler 2 years from now. How about we start looking at paperwork a year from now? I mean, it's wild the degree to which collectors are sort of have powerful agency in that regard.
And while the work is up, while Christopher Wool's work is up, that's when his market gets. Did things start trading hands like crazy around that time?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, for better or worse.
We know the answer to that.
But that's why it's fun from a secondary market perspective to be in a setting like this, where I'm walking amongst work that I am in no position to value. I gave a tour last night. It was really fun to just say, I'm able to look at all of this and just on its merit. Here's what I suggest you look at. Here's an artist who's engaging in a really interesting dialogue, and you've got to love it because there's no way to tell whether or not it's going to appreciate. So just dive in.
It seems like because art does have this, it seems like as art has become trendier and owning art has become trendier, and home, like Metropolitan Home always shows the artwork on the wall and now names it, and which it didn't do probably 20 years ago. There'd be a painting on the wall, but you had no idea what it was. So there's all this this status attached to it. So it seems to me like there'd be a whole new group of people who are collecting art the same way they would collect clothing or furniture or something like that, and which they don't really quite know what they're getting into. They're just throwing money at this trend. And they're going to have artwork that they're probably going to lose interest in, it seems like, right? I mean, they don't have a very established, they haven't done the old school thing, which is to go build a relationship with a particular dealer. Maybe talk about what it means, is it a trend? Are we seeing a trend of people not taking kind of correct custodial interest or stewardship of artwork the way they maybe did once upon a time? Does anyone, Jessica or Sandy, do you advise people, hey, look, I know you have this thing, you need to take care of it?
I've never felt that people needed to be told that. I guess it's the heirs that need to be to be
Their
told
kids.
that, because whoever owns it has some interest in it till it's all over, it's not an issue that comes up very much. You would think it does, but it hasn't with me.
And probably with a lot of the contemporary galleries here in Houston, and I know in Dallas, the dealer would prefer a lot of them don't necessarily have the capital to buy the work back, right? So that's a problem. Although if they're really protective of their artists, they would like to be able to do that. Maybe one of the things that if you really want to get rid of something is to call the dealer you bought it from and see if they'd be willing to take it off your hands. And sometimes they can, and sometimes they can't. It depends on. The biggest galleries they can do that, and they will. But
Can I say, if counter to the premise of our talk, I say err on the side of holding on to it, especially if it's fresh work that's being made by someone actively now. I would say, to your point, it's sort of troubling when you see people rushing to unload something or flip something. I think if you're
how do the trends work then? Could they maybe? So they should be thinking, well, it's okay. I'm not into it right now, but maybe 20 years from now, it's going to be.
Here's, a client of mine recently, she's collecting for a long time some really obscure stuff that had no real secondary market, but she just sort of fell in love with her own pursuit. It was very focused, required a great deal of energy and relationship building with dealers and artists and whatnot. Been working on this for 20 odd years, and I love the way that she said this to me the other day when she agreed to sell at auction, which she was able to do. She said, I want to see how I did. And I like that approach. Like, I loved this stuff. I loved getting it. I loved my relationship with the objects and all the relationships I built throughout the process. I clearly wasn't going about it from an investment perspective, but I'd like to see if this thing I love, if my gut also happens to realize a pretty return. And what's great about that is she's going to be okay if it doesn't, because she had that life with it. But I like that approach of like, let's see how I did. Maybe.
That's what I call your taste being confirmed in the marketplace. Exactly. That's a nice little catchphrase.
Yeah.
And your taste can be confirmed most readily through either auction or a show at a museum.
Or you've mentioned younger artists. I actually think if you're not loving the work, if it's not, going back to the dealer, I think is a great idea because it actually recirculates the work. It might find a home where someone really loves it. It might find a home that eventually makes its way into a museum collection in the future. And I'll say too, as far as when you're thinking about this topic of getting rid of work and you're not sure if an artist has market value, to go back to the dealer, if you are interested in donating it to a museum, the dealer can be a really amazing resource to determine what institution might be interested in that work. Because the dealer will have the best sense of the institutions that are collecting. And there's lots of institutions collecting younger artists. Here in Texas, there's a lot of institutions collecting younger Texas artists. So while the work may not necessarily have a retail, like a secondary market, or it couldn't go to auction with you, there is museums out there that would be, you know, so happy to get a gift from you. So I think that's another option that sort of transcends the market or sort of gets away from market value. Although still getting appraisal is a great idea because you can get, you know, a tax write-off. Actually, the question for you is, what do you do when you're doing appraisals for younger artists that want to go to a museum and there is no research done to determine?
You have to work with the dealer. Hopefully the dealer will work with you to best establish what. It's a charitable gift donation is the term for the document that we would then have to provide, which it's a figure that tethers us. Yeah, the IRS reviews it and determines whether or not this person is worthy of the rebate. But in those cases, it's best to just work directly with the dealer because they will know best if they haven't come to auction.
Well, in dealing with a situation like that, donation to charitable or art museum, the best resource for that is auction records. And if that exists, that can make it very straightforward, clear-cut what kind of value you can give. And I will talk to a client and say, I can't defend a figure higher than this. This recently happened, and I expected him to say, well, I don't want to do it. And he just faced reality. And so that is what happens. And there are sometimes artists who have very strong regional markets. For instance, Jim Love, who does not have a strong national. Then you go to the people who deal with him, in him, and you document your opinion based on that sort of interview with the primary dealer for his work.
And I think because we were in Houston, and I think that this is a good conversation to have, because there would be artists who do have a market here, but only here. Is that right?
It's a conversation I have regularly, which is one that I will never be able to really perfect and make sense to the steward, as you put it, of this object, who loves it, loves the artist, became a collector over the years in Houston, where they see those same objects in everyone's home, and it's just a beloved guy. And for me to have to relay that yes, there's a very deep market for this artist, but it's narrow. And the fact that an individual can be, for whatever reason, never kind of get out of there. And regional is such a pejorative. I wish there was another way we can.
It doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be, yeah. But for some reason it is. It's become that. And there are fabulous artists. I mean, there are female painters from the mid-century making work in Texas that like belong in institutions. I mean, like just really, I think crucial participants in the history of art making that for whatever reason don't break it out to reaching an international market. And it should be no reflection on the artist's intrinsic merit or quality for some reason. And that's the thing, having this conversation with clients is really tricky. For some reason, it just doesn't happen for everyone.
And would you sometimes get work from someone and you say, well, I can't sell it here, but we're going to ship it to another office and have them
absolutely.
Take a stab at it?
So you think of like this grand, just sort of swath of genre being post-war and contemporary art. Well, that's absurd. That's everything. Within that, there are definitely sub-markets. You know, if you're selling a Chiita, it doesn't matter if it's coming from Mexico. It's best sold in London because that's a market that responds better to that work.
What is the biggest market here? What is it in?
In Houston, we have some of this. This is I think one of the most important locales for American paintings, 20th
For
century
American
American paintings.
paintings, there's Houston, right there.